Hello, everybody. Welcome. So grateful to be with us here at ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. Happy New Year. Happy 4th day of January, the day we celebrate in gratitude and remembrance of the gift of the Kumaras, the lighting up of Manas. The title of today's presentation is The Lamp of Spiritual Discernment, and that will be given to us by our own Jonathan Colbert. Okay, now, 2 readings. 1 second here. From the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10. I am the origin of all. All things proceed from me. Believing me to be thus, the wise gifted with spiritual wisdom worship me. Their very hearts and minds are in me, enlightening one another and constantly speaking of me. They are full of enjoyment and satisfaction. To them, thus always devoted to me, who worship me with love, I give that mental devotion, buddhi yoga, by which they come to me. For them do I, out of my compassion, standing within their hearts, destroy the darkness which springs from ignorance by the brilliant lamp of spiritual discernment. And finally, from Cardinal Newman, lead kindly light. Lead kindly light, amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The night is dark, and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. And now we give you our own Jonathan Colbert.
On this January 4th, just take a minute to sound the Gayatri. Om Bhurvavasva Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prashodaya Om. In all 3 worlds, the terrestrial, the astral, celestial, may we meditate on the splendor of that divine invisible sun who illuminates all. May its golden light nurture our understanding and guide us on our journey to its sacred seat. Om. Well, welcome everyone. As Monica so eloquently pointed out, that the first talk of the year with this Aquarian series is kind of sounding a keynote for the rest of the year. And you'll notice that there's a thread through all the talks that have to do with the Buddhic intuition, really, and the light of discernment, and what is involved with lighting up the lamp of discernment within the heart. So there will be talks on as Monica pointed out, the philosophy of perfection, the religion of responsibility, the science of spirituality. And actually, we're going to try an experiment with that. We're going to have the same person give all 3. So he'll be able to tie them all together. So, but also there's about 6 talks on noetic things, noetic metaphysics, noetic action, noetic, can't remember all of them, but there's a lot of ones that have to do, well, what is noetic? And that has to do with psychic and noetic and things like that. There's the noetic, which is the Buddhic, really, and the psychic, which is more the kamic, you could say. But there's other series within the Aquarian series overall that you'll notice a theme. We're actually going to do one on the 7 deadly sins, but it's not going to just be a whole talk focused on, a sin, but it'll be that in contrast to its opposite, like pride and humility, for example, This is a time of year that many, not only theosophists, but many people throughout the world, throughout India, throughout the whole Indian diaspora, throughout the globe, and people who know about this mantram of all mantrams, the mother of mantrams, so to speak, the Gayatri, where deep thought is turned towards that Gayatri. And it talks about this invisible spiritual sun that illuminates all of us, really. And it's our source, it's our inspiration, it's our life. And some people would say, well, that's deity. Well, they can say that, that's fine. Whatever it is, it's a fact in nature, and it supplies a light and sustenance throughout the cosmos for all living beings who are in evolution, really. And every being is on a pilgrimage, is on a journey towards that spiritual sun through inner space, you could say. And we all have an inner sun, invisible sun within us. And the Vedantins would probably call it the Atman. And it is really the light that is within us, that is immortal, everlasting, and as was read in a reading that we read earlier today, having to do with the grand opening of the Banyan Tree bookstore. That reading was actually from the hymn to Dakshinamurti by Shankaracharya. And that, one of the points made in that reading was that the Atman within is one with Brahman. And that is an important reality for us to bear in mind. The Atman within us is at one with the spiritual sun of all of nature and of all of the cosmos. So there is, in the sevenfold principle of man, we talk about Atma, Buddhi, Manas. And there is a story in children's fairy tales about Sleeping Beauty, if you remember that. And so, but it involves two characters, namely Buddhi and Manas. And Sleeping Beauty is played by, is representative of Buddhi, while Manas is representative of the prince. And it so happens that there was a beautiful maiden, and she was walking in the forest, and it so happened that some evil fairies or something did some kind of a curse and had it that she would go to sleep for 100 years. And that not only that, but all of the life in the forest would also go to sleep with her. So the whole forest was just going to go to sleep for 100 years. And remember, this is Buddhi, so we're talking about, so something to think about with that, right? Mm-hmm. Well, another good fairy comes along, and she can't reverse the curse, but she can modify it, apparently. And what she does is she makes it so that that if and when Sleeping Beauty does wake up, then all of the rest of the forest will wake up with her. So, well, after 100 years, apparently, the prince comes along, and he sees her, and he is compelled to give her a kiss, and she wakes up. And then all of the forest wakes up, and all of the nature wakes up along with her. So it's something very beautiful And so now we have the action of the Atma and the Buddhi and the Manas. The Atman, remember, is the spiritual sun. The light of the spiritual sun shines through Buddhi. Buddhi is the transmitting substance, you could say, of the light within us, of the spiritual sun. And that's the light of spiritual discernment within us, is this principle of Buddhi. And it was what was referred to in the reading as the lamp of spiritual discernment. And there's a relationship between Manas and Buddhi here, where by thinking of these great universal ideas using Manas and higher Manas, and by trying to adapt a universal point of view, and by trying to apply these universal principles as ideals in our everyday lives, that has to do with the awakening of the intuition. And that's what this whole year represents. Now, I'd like to talk about two sacred texts that pertain to the Lamp of Spiritual Discernment. One is chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, and the other is the Crest Jewel of Wisdom from Shankaracharya. Chapter 7 in the Gita has to do with the yoga of discrimination and wakening up the lamp of discernment. And that chapter, along with 8 and 9 and then 10, from which Monica just read, that specifically refers to the lamp of spiritual discernment. So those four, you could say, are there's a continuity there. And remember, before chapter 7, we have chapter 6, which has to do with meditation and the focusing and restraint of the thinking principle and learning concentration. So in chapter 7, it starts off by talking about what a precious thing it is to even have this search, to even find this search. And a lot of people will walk into a theosophical meeting or log online and find one, and it's life-changing. It's just stops them dead in the tracks, I've heard reported. And that it's revolutionary. And there's an interesting statistic that's given out in chapter 7, where Krishna starts off and says, only 1 in 1,000 people actually is interested in this whole search, really. And then of those 1 in 1,000, and of means in word problems means times, so 1,000 times 1,000, which means 1,000,000. 1 in 1,000,000 people knows me as I am. Me, who is me? Me is Krishna, right? Because the Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue between Arjuna and his teacher, Krishna. But Krishna is not an ordinary teacher. He's like, it kind of becomes unfolded throughout the book that he happens to be the Logos, like the Lord of the cosmos. And Arjuna doesn't quite know this, but he's starting slowly figuring this thing out. Like, wait a minute. And like every once another chapter, he's like, wait a minute. But he knew that there was something special about Krishna when he was given a choice in this great war that he was about to embark on, called the Mahabharata, where Krishna gave him a choice. Do you want me or do you want all my armies? And he chose, I just want you. So he knew that was the right choice. He just knew it right away. And that's like Buddhic discernment for sure. Because Buddhi, it makes light speed look slow. It's faster than fast. And it's the collapsing of time into the moment. And so it has to do with recognition, spiritual recognition. Like this, the story of when Judge met HPB, so and so forth. That kind of recognition of something's going on here, and I'm going to figure it out later, but something's going on here. That kind of thing. So, and then Krishna proceeds to talk about how rare it is that people really understand my nature, meaning they understand the self of all. That's probably another good definition of who Krishna is. He's the self of all, and he's the higher self in all of us. So to say that it's not that common for people to really understand Krishna, it's almost like saying it's kind of not that common for people to really understand their truest, realist, eternal self. And then he points out, because that's mainly because there's this transcendent side to his nature that's unspeakable. It's realizable, but you can't articulate it in language that a person can really understand, because it transcends the human mind's able to think. But there is an immanent side of his nature. So there's the transcendent and the immanence. And he says, I am the taste in water. I'm the radiance of fire. I'm the sweet smell in the earth. So anybody who loves nature and feels like by communing in nature that there's kind of a communing with God somehow, that's kind of a recognition of that. And we all have that feeling when we go in nature. But Krishna doesn't stop there. He says, I am the wisdom of the wise. So it's like the highest essence in anything. I am the fervor within the ascetic, the intensity of spiritual striving, for example. And interestingly enough, he says, I am desire, regulated by moral fitness. So there's a purity and a dimension to desire that is in fidelity to a moral fitness. And so there's kind of a cosmic dimension to desire. And Theosophists will recall that in the Theosophical Glossary, in relation to the entry under Kamadeva, that there's this kind of universal, primordial, cosmic eros that is the impulse for all of life to learn and to progress and to know. So these are some of the dimensions that are in chapter 7. He also talks about the three gunas, and that he himself, Krishna, has evolved out of his own Maya. All of nature is his, he says. It's nature is a manifestation of consciousness. And that these three qualities of tamas, rajas, and sattva are part of all of nature. And tamas has to do with inertia, rajas has to do with passion, and sattva has to do with purity. And that he says that they are in him, these three qualities, but he is not in them. So he's not of them. He's not determined by their action. So he's pointing to this transcendental realm within the universe and within ourselves that is above these three, psychological, existential aspects of all of life. And that there's something within us that transcends that. That's the field, okay? But there's a knower of the field. And there's always these different levels of subjectivity and objectivity in ever receding levels of subjectivity. There's always the knower behind the knower. And finally, in that chapter, he says that I am ultimately transcendent, but I'm also, and then he says, everything that exists in me like gems on a thread. So all the stars, all the planets, everybody we know, everything that's going on, these are all gems on a thread. That's something to think about. And so there must be something transcendent that holds all this together. And he even goes on to say that I am the Adi Buddha, not Buddha, Buddha, which has to do with the foundation of all of elemental life. And I am the Adi Daivata, the foundation of all the gods and goddesses. And I am the Adi Yajna, the foundation of all forms of sacrifice. And then that leads us to what Monica read from chapter 10, where he says this mysterious thing. The whole aspiration, the whole light of spiritual discernment comes from Krishna. That's a mysterious thing. The aspiration to even know what this light is within comes from Krishna itself. So there's this grace dimension, the grace of the teacher, the grace of the teaching. And it's true with theosophy, the more you learn, the more you want to learn. So there's this kind of reciprocity between the light and the seeker. And so this highest, most aspiring dimension comes from the higher self. It's just, so what does Sri Shankaracharya say about all this? He talks about something called the crest jewel of wisdom. And in India, you'll see people, and amongst Indians in the diaspora here, you'll see women, especially with that bindi mark, right? Mm-hmm. And that's symbolic in ancient times of the wisdom eye. And some students listening to this will recall back, and I think it was the late 60s, early 70s, when the Dalai Lama came out with his first major book called The Opening of the Wisdom Eye, right? And so this is a very ancient topic from a lot of ancient cultures. And that has to do with opening up the eye of buddhi, really, within us, the faculty that can respond to this lamp of spiritual discernment within us. And there is some occult dimensions to the whole thing. It's connected with the pineal gland, which is now atrophied. But that doesn't mean we don't have spiritual discernment, nevertheless. And the more we can live a life of spiritual discernment, presumably in a stretch of lifetimes, the more that wisdom eye will become more, instead of a dormant gland, it'll become an active organ within us. So, but all is not lost. Even now, we can still be intuitive, and we can still bring an intuitive understanding to our studies and to our relationships with other people, and in our efforts to put these kind of teachings into practice. So Shankaracharya points out that there's three things that are very hard to gain. One is manhood, which is being a human being, getting a human body in which to learn. Another is the desire for emancipation. How many people really want to be free, right? And access to masters of wisdom. These things are very difficult to come by. And interesting that B.P. Wade has an article called How to Reach Masters. And of course, the bottom line in that article is you have to reach to their level. You can't expect them to come down to our plane. So But the light of spiritual discernment, that's a step in that direction. And he says that rather than worrying about, who's a teacher, who's not, and all this stuff, it's better to just prepare ourselves to become ready to be a chela, ready to be a disciple. That's our job. And because there's this idea that when the disciple is ready, the master will appear. It's just physics. So you don't have to worry about physics. They take care of themselves. But meanwhile, one can work on oneself. And Shankaracharya talks about how there's 4 qualifications for chelaship. And the first one is viveka, which is discrimination. And that the fundamental discrimination is being able to discern the difference between self, the universal self of all, which we really all are, and not self. So this kind of confusion about who we are, this identity quest, is primary to the whole spiritual search. And it has to do with that which is eternal and that which is fleeting, for example. And this kind of a concept is in Buddhism as well. Can you discern between the eternal and the fleeting, and the universal and the particular? Things like that. So that's the Viveka dimension. And then there's the Viraga dimension. So you have, and Viragya, we actually just heard a talk on Viragya in the Aquarian series. And so that's a dimension in the Voice of Silence, which is really a Buddhist document, but it's also a very powerful dimension in Vedanta, which is kind of what we're talking about. And Vairagya has to do with detachment, and it's not being aloof and that you don't care about anything, but instead it's detachment from one's likes and dislikes and attachments. And I have to have this, and I can't stand that. It's kind of the idea that in the Bhagavad Gita, you have the idea that to a person to whom gold and stone are really the same, then that's detachment. And that's equal-mindedness. And that has a sense of balance. And the Viveka and Viraga, and in English, that's 2 V's, right? The alliteration of 2 V's. But in English, you have the same thing. Viveka is discrimination and Viraga is detachment. So you have the 2 D's. But also you have discernment, and you have a lot of other things. Discretion, deliberation. All these things kind of tie together. So you have Viveka and Vairagya. The third qualification is what he talks about are the 6 virtues. And to me, there isn't any better discussion of these 6 virtues than Robert Crosby does in The Friendly Philosopher. Mm. And you'll recall in this room the treatment, or actually the usage of that section from The Friendly Philosopher in our Theosophical Tenets book. It's called The 6 Virtues. And so that's from Shankaracharya. And so those 6 virtues are sama, which is the control of the mind and the heart in terms of the runaway emotions and so forth, just out of control storms, the big drama. Remember, we're talking about qualifications for chelaship. So some kind of control about the mind, some kind of, you could call it leadership of the mind, you could say. And then there's Dhamma, which is control of the body. And so all of the impulses and compulsions and so forth that are involved with the body, that's required. This is just basics. But I would think that would include also of the brain in reference to anxiety. This would have to do with hormones and so forth. Um, Obsessive compulsion disorder, you could say. This is all part of the body, but it's also part of the mind, you know. But there are techniques to kind of overcome all these things. And the next one is uparati. And that is when you renounce all crutches, all things that you leaned on. So all external aids, for example. I can't be alone. I need to be with people, or just whatever you lean on, right? Whatever your addictions are, you could say. But what Crosby talks about is you actually renounce formal external religion, because that's a crutch. You renounce the idea of a personal God, and you start thinking more philosophically about deity. You see what I'm saying? So no, you renounce kind of the old structures of the past. And interestingly enough, the whole planet is being forced to do that right now. All the old structures are just disintegrating, just right in front of us. So we're kind of being forced into this uparati mode as a collective humanity, you could say. The next one is titiksha, and that has to do with enduring strength, long suffering, but doesn't so much have to do with the modern use of the word suffering, but it's forbearing hardships, you could say, the ability to see the long haul. That's titiksha. And so it's like unremitting energy, you could say. The next one is samadhana, which is the being constitutionally incapable of deviating from the right path. That's quite a standard, right? And another one, the final one of these six is, now I can't remember what it is, starts with a B. Shraddha, which doesn't start with a B. Don't know what happened there. So, yeah, Shraddha has to do with faith in the teacher's power to teach and in one's own power to learn, and that they're very much connected with one another. You know, a lot of times people say, well, I don't have a very good teacher. Well, what one's really saying is, I don't think I can learn this stuff or whatever. And the degree to which one has confidence in one's own power to learn is the degree to which that person thinks that everybody's a good teacher. Even their enemies are a good teacher, because at least I learned something, you know, that kind of attitude. It's a whole switch around, right? So these are some of the ideas. Oh, and then so that's the third of the three qualifications. So six are the third of the three qualifications. The fourth is the unremitting desire for freedom and emancipation. That's, you know, the fourth qualification. So a person at that point, if a person has mastered these four qualifications, they will find a teacher, they will find teachings, they will find, like in Buddhism, it talks about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They'll find other people that are of like mind and so forth. And they will realize that they are connected with a whole community of seekers and searchers, you know, that they're not alone. And there is something that I kind of wanted to conclude with. This year, 2025, is, well, it's always the best of times, it's always the worst of times, right? And it doesn't take a person to be a genius to figure out that it's going to be quite the year, right? Just with the world, the globe, geopolitics, economics, everything. And also you see a lot of people waking up to what's going on, to seeing through some of the Maya. It just seems like that. And more people are saying that, you know what? there's a crisis of duty that's going on. People are trying to find their duty, and they're confused about their duty. And even if I was confused about it, I was just doing what a lot of other people were doing. And so we have to figure out what our duty is. What is our swadharma? And what is our, what are we here to do? And theosophically, we're all here to do something, every single one of us. And we're all part of the economy of the great system. All of us are. And we're all part of the interdependent web of life, really. So each person has to find that duty, but the way to do it is to find that lamp, that spiritual lamp within. And that's why it's so important, this idea about being able to discern through the three gunas and so forth, to be able to discern the light and the dark, the world eternal ways, but the light in the darkness and the darkness in the light and so forth. There's so much subtlety to discern. And as a person advances on this kind of a search, they'll find that there are various, I guess you'd call them powers, siddhis, potencies. Nowadays, I hear people saying, well, what's one of your superpowers, or something like that. These are kind of potencies within ourselves that are not like that per se. Well, they could be, but they more have to do with strengths and merits that have been earned in previous lifetimes that they're only coming back into in this lifetime. They're reawakening into them. And as we develop things like the increased power to love, the increased power to know, to understand, to more release of the will, you could say, we'll find that we're not alone in that, and that there are other people that are doing that too. And as much of a struggle as it may have been for us to kind of light up the spiritual lamp within, others are going through those struggles. And as a person develops these powers and these faculties, they'll find that they have almost a new set of duties, you could say, because they are the trustee of these potencies. And that there's something about nature that recognizes that. And so others who are struggling with these things, they're going to be reaching out in the darkness for some kind of hope, some kind of a light. And you're going to feel these things. You're going to feel unexpected mood changes. What's pulling me down? I don't get it, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of this interdependent web of life. And so a person starts to come into a new field of responsibilities. And most of what I'm getting this from is from a theosophical author called George William Russell. And he talked about this inner light as the living light. That once it starts to be kindled within ourselves, it doesn't stop there. It wants to go out and to fill up the darkness. It's alive. And so others are going to be aspiring toward that light, but they're going to be going through their ups and downs. And he is just pointing out to that responsibility that when we allow our own inner light to go out with doubt and despair, it's part of the interconnectedness of things that we'll find. Nobody else can tell us these things. This is like an inner mystical thing, right? We'll find that maybe we're letting somebody down that we don't even know, And so that's why at that point, it becomes so critical and so important to not only kindle that lamp of spiritual discernment, but to keep it going, and to let it grow and to let it be a source of inspiration for anyone that we may come into contact with. And as George William Russell was saying, countless other people that we don't even know. Now, as we become part of a community that we may know these people, we may not, you know. So there is a story that we wanted to read. We'll have Monica read that, and it pertains to all these matters of, you know, kindling and keeping alive the lamp of spiritual discernment. So, Monica? Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. George William Russell, the great Irish poet, writer, editor, painter, was also a writer on mysticism. He was a central figure in the Theosophical group of Dublin for many years, and he was also a great friend and colleague of our Mr. William Quan Judge. Here, in George William Russell's essay entitled The Secret of Strength, he relays a remarkable story regarding his dear friend, Felix, as well as a great teaching contained in a powerful dream. Here he begins. My friend Felix was strangely disturbed. Not only were his material affairs unsettled, but he was also passing through a crisis in his spiritual life. Two paths were open before him. On one side lay the dazzling mystery of passion. On the other, the small old path held out its secret and spiritual allurements. I had hope that he would choose the latter, and I was keenly interested in his decision. I invested the struggle going on in his mind with something of universal significance, seeing in it a symbol of the strife between light and darkness, which are the world's eternal ways. He came in late one evening. I saw at once by the dim light that there was something strange in his manner. I spoke to him in enquiry. He answered me in a harsh, dry voice, quite foreign to his usual manner. Oh, I'm not going to trouble myself anymore. I will let things take their course. This seemed the one idea in his mind. The one thing he understood clearly was that things were to take their own course. He failed to grasp the significance of any other idea or its relative importance. He answered, "Aye, indeed," with every appearance of interest and eagerness to some trivial remark about the weather, and was quite unconcerned about another and most important matter, which should have interested him deeply. I soon saw what had happened. His mind, in which forces so evenly balanced had fought so strenuously, had become utterly wearied out and could work no longer. A flash of old intuition illumined it at last. It was not wise to strive with such bitterness over life. Therefore, he said to me, in memory of this intuition, I'm going to let things take their course. A larger tribunal would decide. He had appealed unto Caesar. I sent him up to his room and tried to quiet his fever by magnetization with some success. He fell asleep, and as I was rather weary myself, I retired soon after. This was the vision of the night. It was surely in the room I was lying and on my bed, and yet space opened on every side with pale, clear light. A slight wavering figure caught my eye, a figure that swayed to and fro. I was struck with its utter feebleness, yet I understood it was its own will or some quality of its nature which determined that palpitating movement towards the poles between which it swung. What were they? I became silent as night and thought no more. Two figures, awful in their power, opposed each other. The frail, being wavering between them, could, by putting out its arms, have touched them both. It alone wavered, for they were silent, resolute, and knit in the conflict of will. They stirred not a hand nor a foot. There was only a still quivering, now and then as of intense effort, but they made no other movement. Their heads were bent forward slightly, their arms folded, their bodies straight, rigid, and inclined slightly backwards from each other, like two spokes of a gigantic wheel. What were they, these figures? I knew not, and yet gazing upon them, thought, which took no words to clothe itself, mutely read their meaning. Here were the culminations of the human, towering images of the good and evil man may aspire to. I looked at the face of the evil adept. His bright red-brown eyes burned with a strange radiance of power. I felt an answering emotion of pride, of personal intoxication, of psychic richness rise up within me, gazing upon him. His face was archetypal, the abstract passion which eluded me in the features of many people I knew was here declared, exultant, defiant, giantesque. It seemed to leap like fire to be free. In this face, I was close to the legendary past, to the hopeless worlds where men were martyred by stony kings, where prayer was hopeless, where pity was none. I traced a resemblance to many of the great destroyers in history whose features have been preserved: Napoleon, Ramses, and 100 others, named and nameless. The long line of those who were crowned, sceptered in cruelty. His strength was in human weakness. I saw this. For space and the hearts of men were bare before me. Out of space, there flowed to him a stream half invisible of red. It nourished that rich, radiant energy of passion. It flowed from men as they walked and brooded in loneliness or as they tossed in sleep. I withdrew my gaze from this face, which awoke in me a lurid sense, accompaniment, and turned it on the other. An aura of pale, soft blue was around this figure through which gleamed an underlight as of universal gold. The vision was already dim and departing, but I caught a glimpse of a face godlike in its calm, terrible in the beauty of a life we know only in dreams, with strength which is the end of the hero's toil, which belongs to the many times martyred soul. Yet not far away, nor in the past, was its power. It was the might of life, which exists eternally. I understood how easy it would have been for this one to have ended the conflict, to have gained a material victory by its power. But this would not have touched on or furthered its spiritual ends. Only its real being had force to attract that real being, which was shrouded in the wavering figure. This truth, the adept of darkness knew also, and therefore he intensified within the sense of pride and passionate personality. Therefore, they stirred not a hand nor a foot, while under the stimulus of their presence culminated the good and evil in the life which had appealed to a higher tribunal to decide. Then this figure, wavering between the two, moved forward and touched with its hand the sun of light. All at once, the scene and actors vanished, and the eye that saw them was closed. I was alone with darkness and a hurricane of thoughts. Strange and powerful figures, I knew your secret of strength. It is only to be. Nature, quickened by your presence, leaps up in response. I knew no less the freedom of that human soul, for your power only revealed its unmanifest nature, it but precipitated experience. I knew that although the gods and cosmic powers may war over us forever, it is we alone who declare them victors or vanquished. For the rest of the vision of that night was prophetic, and the feet of my friend are now set on that way which was the innermost impulse of his soul.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. Do you want to do questions?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
We can take questions from either in here or in the Zoom audience,
In the Zoom.
or comments.
Yes. Okay. I've done the wrong thing already. That's not right. Get out. And I'm trying to, Jonathan, I want to bring this. Could you look at this, please? So that when people raise their hands, I can see them. How do I get that happening?
I think it'll work the way it is.
No, but I'm not seeing the full picture. That's what I'm.
Let me see if I can try something over here.
Okay.
Is that better?
There we go. There's Laura. Yes. Hi, Laura. Laura has a question for us.
Well, I was just put my hand up so you could see it. So,
Okay.
Yes,
Thank
but I think there was one thing that was very compelling in your talk that I thought was interesting. I see if I can find it. I wrote it down. Always the knower behind the knower. Tracing, so that sort of came to mind. Always the knower behind the knower. Could you speak further to that?
I could, but I'm hoping others in the audience will contribute.
Yes, if anyone else has a thought on that. How do we realize the knower behind the knower? And it seems that it's a constant practice, a constant effort with no beginning or end, it seems.
Yeah, this is reminiscent of the teaching of Ramana Maharshi. And he was an adept, apparently, who lived in India. And I think he died in the early 50s. And his teaching, for the most part, was silence. But he did write a book. And it basically, it has to do with asking ourselves the fundamental question, who are we? And then who is it that's asking the question? Then who wants to know about that? Going receding within. And going into different, it's the self. It's asking who is the self? And that is a whole pathway to approaching the self of all, you know. There's also a teaching, one of the topics that's going to be in the Aquarian series, I think in the fall, is just subject and object. And that's a topic that's been in a lot of the ULT lodges over the last 100 years. Is, you know, subject and object. That's the title of the talk. And that there's an article about that from William Quan Judge. And he talks about how objectivity and subjectivity are not absolutes, that they are relative to any given plane. So what is subjective on one level, at a higher level, and we'll get into what's higher in a minute, but at a higher level, that becomes objective. And then what was subject at that level, at even higher level, that becomes objective. So that must mean that there's these receding levels of subjectivity. As Ken would say, the steeplechase, right? So it's really a quest and a question, and it's the series of questions of who am I, who is the self. That series of questions can become a quest in and of itself. The continuity of those questions is the quest. So it's never ending. But where the lamp of spiritual discernment comes in, it would seem, at least to this student, would be just to be aware of that, and to be aware of one's own vulnerability to Maya, and that one works within the illusion of so forth. I have a job, I go to work, I do these things. Okay, that's a Maya, but not to worry about it too much because one's doing one's duties and so forth. But to always realize that there's something beyond, and that maybe I can bring something more of a more transcendental truth to all my duties, and maybe it'll affect how I treat people, and affect my ability to put myself in the shoes of another. So this might be kind of a use of this idea of different levels of subjectivity, and to know, and it has to do with our speaker last week on what's the last of the seven virtues? Somebody.
Prajna. Prajna.
Thank you. He spoke about absolute and relative truth, and Paramartha Satya and Samvriti Satya. Paramartha Satya has to do with the affirmation that there is absolute truth. And yet, anybody who says, like Lao Tzu would say, anybody who pretends to know the Tao probably doesn't know the Tao. Okay. So in other words, truths that can be communicated through words and through that kind of logic, those are relative truths. And some relative truths are more useful than others. But the relative truths that point us in the direction of the absolute truth, that's a very beneficial, and healing kind of a truth. But to know that there's these never stopping levels of the self behind the self, and then to be able to universalize that self, and to think about there must be a self of all. So we have all these busy selves driving around in cars, walking, reading, on airplanes, all these people just like an anthill. The whole earth is like an anthill. They have all these selves out and about doing what they're doing. But what if there was one self that was looking through the eyes of all the selves? That's quite a remarkable thought. So, but Alora, did you have anything else to contribute to that?
It was beautifully said. I like the idea of the one self looking through all the selves. And if we could get to that position, then we could definitely be able to help others, it would seem, if we can reach that position. And so that would be the way in which, to discern, is to sort of always be asking, what way can I help in this, to shine that light for others? And, but that, how do you said that one self sees through all selves. Sees. That was so beautifully said. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken Scott.
And I had a comment on your question, Laura, about this. Jonathan said this phrase about the ever receding levels of subjectivity, regarding the knower or the witness. One thing I think about with regard to, say, the septenary nature of man and nature, of us people, is that we have a center of gravity of who we think we are, identity. I'm identified with this body, this shirt, this personality, etc. And that one of the, Truth Collins does this a lot. You have a word in English, and it's in some of our literature, and that's calling these principles or referring to them as a vehicle. And so, of course, the other thing that's like a vehicle is an automobile or a car. And so when I'm in the car, I realize I'm not the car. I'm using the car. I'm driving around in this Toyota vehicle that I drive around in, but I'm not the car. And so then I started thinking, well, what if I have this little mental game that I'm playing for about a year or so, that I'm not, that the me, the center of identity, is not contained in Ken Campos. I'm not this physical body, this personality, this professional life, this social life, all the other different aspects of Ken Campos, the body, the mind, the training, the history, the experiences. But that's just a vehicle or something else. And then my sense of I-ness, then I kind of can exercise like a habit that I have a different level of I-ness. And indeed, people have said, just what Jonathan said a minute ago, that as you go from one level of identity to another more rarefied level of identity, then you look down on, or you look at the other thing. And so then the subject at one level becomes the object of the next level up, when the subject then is moved up to a larger, more expansive sense of identity. And every now and again, I know there's another cute phrase that we've heard around here called a peek experience, like having a peek at something behind the curtains. And that as one goes into these levels of experience at more transcendental levels, you might have a peak experience, say if you're out in nature, feeling like you're one with all the trees and animals and insects and all the mountain lions and bears and then all the little critters and the lizards and the bugs. And that's a little peak experience to having one of this higher level of identity. And so I think that regression, that ever receding levels of identity is part of that. And then when Krishna has that comment that was right before that, Jonathan, you were talking about the three gunas, that the gunas are within Krishna, but he's not within them.
Yeah.
And so all of our identities really are connected to these very guna-like principles. And that we then advance further and further. So that was just one of the little exercises I've been doing lately for about a year or so. Thinking of myself like I'm a pitcher of water on the table, it's not really me, and to kind of shift my sense of who I think I am.
And we got the benefit. Thank you.
Thanks, yeah.
Fantastic. I just want to say that sounds akin like a relatively popular meditation that I've heard of, I think, out of the Hindu tradition, where I am not, this job or this position. I am not this body. And to sit and do that and go from the most external to the most internal part of yourself has a real process that is said leads you to that state of who we really are. So that's great that you just put me in the mind of that. But Meluka has her hand up and she has a question. Hi, Meluka.
Hi, everybody, and happy Kumara's Day, happy New Year of the esoterics. And
Yes.
Lovely talk, Jonathan, but I would like everybody to give big hands of applause to Jonathan and also his team for this amazing series that happened every Saturday for several years now, and it's been quite successful. And he make a lot of sacrifices, talking about sacrifices, to make that, for all this to happen and to bring us together. And congratulations on your library. I hope that you post the pictures of it and tell us what books are available, because I'm pretty sure a lot of us would like to, contribute as well. Now, on what you just said earlier, and talking about sacrifice, there was these Dhyanic Kumaras that came and reincarnated in Earth a day like today, so that we can have illumination of our mind, of a thinking principle. They sacrifice themselves in order to do that. This is perfect being, and they have to incarnate in this grotesque form, which was the Lumerians at the time. They almost look like animals, and it was difficult for them, and they have to do it. So they sacrifice. So my point is here, you were talking about some of that too earlier. So maybe the way to find ourselves is to sacrifice for others. HPV said that we should be helping people who suffer. She didn't say, let's go and, do all this kind of stuff that sometimes we do. She was talking about we have to help suffering humanity in whatever way you can. And then you have people, and I mentioned this, Mother Teresa, right? She's not a theosophist, but she acts like a theosophist, because theosophy is what theosophy does. And that's what I got some of your talk inspired me to think the thoughts. And maybe you were talking about put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That is compassion. That's sacrifice. And I think maybe that's how we find ourselves, by doing for others, stepping out of our ego, and give. So in this note, I would like to say again, and thank you so much. And everybody should raise their hand and applaud him. There is a little...
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, you know what time it is? Oh, yeah.
Or 40.
Time to applaud. No,
5:40?
5:42.
Okay. Okay.
So we're okay. Shoba has her hand up. Shoba.
Hi, Jonathan. That was wonderful. I love the way you just stand there and riff. I love it. It's really good. You talked about, this whole thing is about discernment, right? I couldn't help going back to Bhavani Shankar and his 9 stages of devotion, because it's very interesting. He calls them the Navavidha Bhakti. And then when he comes to the last, which is the bhakta, the devotee disappears and becomes the Bhagwan, Krishna. He's merged in the Krishna. And it's interesting to see right at the end of the 18th chapter, when Krishna asks Arjuna, have you understood? I mean, have you gotten what I've been saying? I'm paraphrasing. And then he says, Nashto moha. He says, all my doubts are cleared. And this is beautiful, because he's talking about the merging with the Bhagwan. And then he says, thus is devotion the potent power that leads to and makes possible the utter self-renunciation and self-surrender, which are the only means for spiritual illumination. So just like Miluka talked about sacrifice, another way of looking at spiritual discernment is this stages of devotion that leads to the ultimate assimilation.
That is just so, so beautiful. There's something about bhakti, as it becomes more refined, it becomes less dualistic until finally it's a non-dual kind of bhakti. Whereas the yoga and the union with the one and with the self of all. And it's interesting that some people say that there's these 2 paths. And you could argue this. There's the path of liberation and the path of renunciation. And so the question is which path do we want? Do we want liberation or do we want renunciation? A big part of, we talked about Krishna, we talked about Shankaracharya, but we haven't talked a whole lot about Buddha. And, if Krishna is really the philosophy of perfectibility, and if Shankaracharya is paradigmatic of the science of spirituality, then the religion of responsibility is exemplified par excellence by the message of Buddha. And in this lodge, we have a picture of Theosophy and Buddhism coming together with a teacher, Raghavan Iyer, who's sharing a book, which happens to be The Voice of the Silence, they're both looking at this book. And the Dalai Lama looks very interested. And so this is where all these different currents can come together. And Theosophy is like a synthesis of all these. And it tries to discern, if you will, the heart of all of these different systems. And even in Vedanta, it's not explicit about the renunciation. It's explicit about what you have to renounce, which is formerly who you thought you were and all the unlearning that's involved. But what it says about Mahatmas, what Vedanta does say about Mahatmas, is that they're inherent. First of all, they come periodically, like the coming of the spring. They're essentially regenerative beings. Their inherent will and their fiber of their being is that of healing and beneficence and sacrifice. So that's the Bodhisattva ideal. And with that, could we close? And could you read that? I think it's on page 425 from the jewel. This is that kind of famous thing from Shankaracharya, articulating much better what I just now tried to articulate. So,
okay. Well, before I do that, I would like to just say that we have a couple of things in the chat with Ms. Ann Butters saying thank you to everyone. Our Judy Salzman had to go early, but she said thank you very much. So let's see if there's anything but that. I think that's it. All right. So,
Monica,
yes.
Sean A. said, appreciated and gratitude as well. The Zoom is a lifesaver.
Okay. Beautiful. Oh, we do have one more question, I believe, from Sean.
Let's say thank you, Jonathan. I do understand that you see Zoom as a hybrid way of spreading the teachings and sharing it with everyone since COVID and the use of it. But during your presentations, and it's happened a few times at another Zoom from a different lodge, there is an opening from the heart where it was felt that intuitively that I was there with you in San Diego at the lodge with everyone, and never discount the technology or the new ways of communicating it, because for myself, even though I went to India a few times, I found after years of reflection, I never needed to go to begin with.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Sean, so much.
Thank you, Sean. And one more from Desiree, and then we will close.
Thank you.
Desiree.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Jonathan. Beautiful presentation, both of you. I just have one little thing to add, and I know we talked about having to live up to that Buddhic principle. We can't bring that down. We have to really struggle to work our way forward. And but I did want to say, even though that's the case, we are surrounded by love. We are surrounded. We're never alone. And I think that's something we can, in those times of feeling desperation and dissolution, I think just reminding ourselves that we are never alone. Not just out here in the physical world where we can see, feel, hear, and touch, but also in behind the scenes. And also, I when you were giving the representation of holding both stones, the gold and the regular stone, I was also thinking about what it takes to make a stone into a diamond. Intense pressure over long periods of time, and that's the alchemical process. So even though that we are suffering, we do for a long time, it is all for building that compassion that Maluka spoke about earlier. We can't know it until we suffer, and we suffer not alone, we suffer together. So anyway, I just wanted to, beautiful presentation, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Desiree. And thank you, Jonathan. We will close after this final reading to you all. Jonathan, just magnificent. This is by Ibn al-Farid.
No, wait a minute. It's
405.
read on
Page 405.
425.
Oh.
And it's from Shankaracharya.
Well, there you go. Please forgive.
And it's kind of the Bodhisattva ideal.
Yes, I see it.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, this is from Sri Shankaracharya, the great and peaceful ones. The great and peaceful ones live regenerating the world like the coming of the spring. Having crossed the ocean of embodied existence themselves, they freely aid all others who seek to cross it. The very essence and inherent will of Mahatmas is to remove the suffering of others, just as the ambrosia-rayed moon of itself cools the earth, heated by the intense rays of the sun. Namaste and good night, all. Everybody be well and safe.
Namaste.
Namaste. And don't forget your New Year's resolution.
Yes.
How important to do it. So the higher, the better.
Yes.
Namaste.
Hare Om
Thank
Tat Sat.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.